One of the most common tight places in the modern human body is the front of the hip or hip flexor area. Tight hip flexors can contribute to low back pain and knee pain, and don't even get me started on how they affect your posture. So in today's video, I'm going to show you my 2 favorite ways to stretch them. And all you're going to need is a folded blanket and maybe a chair or a wall to hold on to for balance. But before we dive into that, the boring disclaimer. So this is where you're going to want to use that folded blanket or padded surface, as well as a chair or a wall to hold on to for balance. What we're going to be doing in this first stretch is targeting the long head of the quadriceps, which is your front thigh muscle. That long head actually crosses the hip and is therefore a very powerful hip flexor that tends to be pretty tight and grippy in us modern humans. So the side that you want to stretch first, you're going to leave that knee down on the pad, and then you're simply going to take the other foot forward so that you're in this kind of half kneeling position. Now, if when you get into this position, you notice that your pelvis is tilted forward, which is making your back arch, just take a moment and see if you can bring that pelvis into a more vertical position so the tailbone points straight down toward the floor. Now that might bring on a very powerful stretch here, and if so, this is where you're going to stop. If you don't feel much of a stretch, go ahead and squeeze the cheek on this side, and you should feel the stretch come on in the front of the thigh and the hip here. Now you're only going to hold this for a couple of seconds, and then I want you to relax the buttock and then hinge forward so that you completely release the tension along the front of the thigh and hip. You're going to hold that sort of break for about 2 seconds, and then you're going to gently go right back into the stretch position, making sure that pelvis is vertical, the tailbone points straight down. Again, holding for a couple of seconds before you release the stretch. Now, what I want you to do is practice this on-off stretch about 5 or 6 times on each side. If you feel like your hip flexors on this particular stretch are getting a little easier, like the stretch isn't quite as intense as it was, then you can move on. If you feel like you need a little bit more, then you can add a few more repetitions. Now you'll notice that I use an on-off stretching technique. It's probably a bit different from what you've used to stretch muscles in the past. So if you hold a static stretch for 30 to 60 seconds, it can cause that muscle to reactively shorten when you finish stretching, and it can cause other muscles in the vicinity to start gripping as a substitute for those exhausted hip flexors. Now, we don't want any of that. What we want is nice, long, comfortable hip flexors that allow us to stand and walk with ease and allow our buttocks to work properly. Now, if this is a new concept to you, the whole idea that tight hip flexors can actually cause your buttocks to shut down, then I invite you to look at my DBS video, Dead Butt Syndrome. I've dropped a link in the description below so you can check that out. So before I start the second stretch, if you're finding this information helpful, please go ahead and hit that like button and do share it with friends and family members who you think could benefit from it. I really appreciate your help in getting the information out to those who need it. All right, now for our second stretch, we'll have a similar setup. We're going to be focusing on psoas, which you've probably heard of. It's the big hip flexor. It attaches to your lumbar spine and then down onto your thigh bone. So it's a powerful flexor of the hip and lower back. Now, to get started, you're going to figure out which leg you want to stretch first, and you're going to leave that knee down on the pad. So very similar start position to the earlier stretch. But what I want you to do this time is lean forward and take your weight onto your forward leg, and just take a moment to kind of rock off the side of your kneecap. So now your weight on this down leg is going to be just to the inside of your kneecap, and you can let your foot go in the back here so that the whole leg can roll off the kneecap. Once you've got that, I want you to come back upright again. And just as we did in the first stretch, take a moment and make sure that pelvis is relatively vertical, tailbone pointing downward. We really don't want to be arching the back here and giving in to those tight hip flexors. We're trying to get some length in them. So once you've got that pelvis in position, you may feel enough of a stretch right here. If you don't, you can gently take the whole trunk forward just a little bit. So it's not that big old lunge you might have learned in a fitness class in the past. You don't need that much when your pelvis is in the right position. You probably are agreeing with me right now if you're playing with me here. So you're only going to hold this for a couple of moments, and then I want you to relax and really back out of it. Take all the tension off of that hip flexor. Give it a break. Once it's had a break, you're going to come back into that vertical pelvis position and gently push back into the stretch. Once again, staying to the inside of the kneecap here. Hold for a couple of seconds and then back completely out of it, giving it a break. So I want you to practice this about 5 or 6 times per side, just like we did the other one. If you're feeling like you need a little bit more, do a few more reps. If you feel like you don't need as many, do fewer. But I want you to practice these throughout the day for best effect, because since we sit throughout the day, all day long, it really helps to practice doing the opposite, opening up those hip flexors throughout the day as well. Okay, I hope you found this helpful. That's all I've got for you today. So until I see you next time, keep moving and be well.